Hey kiddos, today we are going to be talking about algebraic reasoning specifically. So just a few properties, well, I guess a little bit more than a few properties that you need to know. We're going to let A, B, and C be real numbers. And we're going to look at the addition property of equality, which basically just means that if A equals B, then A plus C equals B plus C. Your subtraction property of equality, if A equals B, then A minus C equals B minus C. Then you have the multiplication property of equality. If A equals B, then A times C equals B times C. You also have the division property of equality, making sure that if A equals B and that C is not equal to 0, then you can say that A divided by C is equal to B divided by C. You can't divide by 0, okay? Then we have substitution property of equality, which says that if you have A equals B, then A can be substituted for B in any equation or expression. And lastly, we have the distributive property of equality, meaning that if you have A times B plus C, it would equal, if you distribute, right, if we multiply it out, it would be A times B plus A times C, where A, B, and C are real numbers. So don't freak out about all these words. Really, you guys, these are things you guys actually technically already do. For example, if I had a problem like x plus 5 equals 10, right? Well, I would use the subtraction property to be able to solve for x, because I have to subtract 5 to both sides. So that's actually me using the subtraction property to be able to figure out what the value of x is, okay? So that's me using that subtraction. Like I said, so these are all technically things that you all have done before. For example, even if I had like 2x equals 10, right? Well, in order to solve for x, we're going to have to do the opposite of multiplying, so that would be to divide. Well, guess what property goes with that? That is the division property that I'm using, okay? Then I could get that x is equal to 5. All right, so these are all things technically that you guys have seen in algebra before. There is actually one more property that I want you to add to this list, and it's right here. It's the combine like terms property. So if you had, for example, two variables on the same side that you have to get together, or even two variables on different sides that you have to get together, the rule that we would use, that property, okay, is going to be combining like terms. All right, let's move on. All right, so our first example has 2w plus 5 equals 9. Then it says we would get, second step, 2w equals 4, and the last step we get the w equals 2. So we're trying to figure out what are our steps, what are my reasons to be able to justify why we got to these steps. So the first one is usually always given. You have to be given an equation to start with. So 2w plus 5 equals 9 is a given. They gave us that. So how did we get 2w equals 4? So what did we do? What did we get rid of? Hopefully you see that we got rid of that plus 5, right? And how do we get rid of that plus 5? Hopefully you're saying by subtracting it. So that would be the subtraction property. Then to get w equals 2, what did we do? 2w equals 4. Well, hopefully you see that's 2 times w equals 4, so we have to do the opposite there, which would be to divide by 2. So if we divide by 2, that means we're using the division property to get our answer. All right, now let's look at example number 2. Same concept, you're given an equation, okay, but this time they're telling us what we're going to do, all right? So I'm actually, as you can see, I already wrote out the problem down over here, and we're going to work it out following their rules, and then we can go back and write in what our answers will be. So the first thing they tell us is that B, they want us to use the addition property. So I'm going to use the addition property. That tells me that this minus 34, I'm actually going to add it to both sides. And when I do that, I get 8x, that canceled out, equals 40. Then from there, continue solving, right? I see step C says their division property, which means I'm going to divide both sides by 8, which means I would end up with x equals 5. So, for B, the addition property, our answer is 8x equals 40. Notice that's what we got when we worked it out. And then last but not least, x equals 5. All right, let's look at number 3. Same concept. This time, again, we're given all the work. We're going to justify the answers, okay? So what are properties that we use? So you have 5z minus 3z plus 6 equals 10. That's given. They have to start with an equation. So looking at the second step, I noticed we got 2z plus 6 equals 10. So the question is, how did they get 2z? So what did they do here to the 5z minus 3z? Well, remember that's that property I asked you to add. That's that combined like terms, okay? Then from here, I see we get 2z equals 4, right? Which tells me they got rid of that plus 6. So how did they get rid of that plus 6? Hopefully you're saying they did the opposite of plus, which would be to subtract. So they did the subtraction property. And then last but not least, you have 2z equals 4. So to get z equals 2, we have to, you got it, divide. So we're going to use that division property. All right, let's go ahead and go to problem number 4. And again, this time they've given us what our rules are. So they're telling us what our direction is. They're telling us what we're going to do. And we have to figure out what goes in those blanks. So I'm just going to work out the problem first. So I have 6m minus 9 minus 2m equals 3. Now, you should notice that you have variables on the same side. So hopefully you're thinking that we need to combine those, which, hey, step B, combine like terms. So 6m minus 2m leaves us with 4m minus 9 equals 3. All right, so then our next step, C, they say addition property. So that means they got rid of that minus 9 by adding 9. What you do to one side, you guys know to do to the other. And when I do that, we get 4m equals 9 plus 3, 12. And last but not least, the last step they tell us that we're going to do is division property, which means we're going to divide both sides by 4, and we get m equals 3. So now you should be able to fill in your steps. So for the combined like terms, we ended up with 4m minus 9 equals 3. When we did the addition property, we added the 9's to both sides. We end up with 4m equals 12. And last but not least, when we divided both sides by 4, we end up with our, answer, m equals 3. Okay, just a few more problems. So let's look at number 5. Same concept here. We're given all the work, but we are going to write down what reasons or what we did to get that answer. Okay, so again, the problem is 2 times 3d plus 10 equals 14, and that is given, okay, because we have to start with something. So from here, we notice our second equation that we get is 6d plus 20 equals 14. So the question is, what did they do right here? Hopefully you recall the distribution property. So that's the distributive property there. And now, moving on to the next one, I see we get 6d equals negative 6. So I see they got rid of that plus 20 from the left side. So the question is, how did they get rid of that plus 20? Hopefully you know that you would be subtracting that 20, which means we're using the subtraction property. And then last but not least, we get d equals negative 1. So how did they get rid of this 6 that's with the variable d? Hopefully you're saying that they divided. So our last step there would be the division property. All right, notice number 6 is an OYO. That means on your own, on your own, on your own. So work that out solo. So I'm going to go ahead and jump down to number 7. We got, actually I lie, haha. Number 7's also an OYO. So you will also do that one on your own. So 6 and 7 are on your own. So I'm going to jump down to number 8. Notice I have it written out already so that I can actually show all my work and when I work this out. And I'm going to follow the rules or the answers that they've given me here as far as what my steps are going to be to solve it. So I notice they start off with the addition property. So that means I'm adding something to one side. So really, I have a few choices here of what I can add. I'm going to get my variables together because that's typically what we should always do first. But in order for me to get my variables together, notice I'm not going to call it combine like terms, okay, because we're moving across an equal sign. So we're going to add. So I am actually going to add the single a, so the 1a, to both sides. And when I do that, I end up with 8 minus 6a equals negative 16. Okay, so that's my addition property. Now they tell me my second step is to do subtraction. So I can't be moving that negative 6a to the other side, but this 8 is positive, and I know if I'm going to follow the rule there of subtraction, I'm going to have to subtract it to the other side because it is positive. So I'm going to subtract 8 to both sides. That cancels out. You get negative 6a equals net negative 24. So now our last step, and the last step that they tell us that we're going to do, is that division property. So we're going to be dividing both sides by the number negative 6. And when we do that, those cancel out, and we get that a is equal to a positive 4. So now let's reveal our answers here. You should have 8 minus 6a equals negative 16, which is what we did. Then we should have gotten negative 6a equals negative 24. We did that as well. And lastly, a is equal to 4. Voila! Good stuff. Ciao.